We all know how important soil health is. It contributes so much to the fertility and functioning of our farm. Things like capturing water, so water infiltration, holding that water, so water holding capacity, soil supplies, all our nutrients and requirements for our plants to grow. Everything is really built on soil, unless of course you're in a hydroponic setup. But ultimately, soil and the fertility of our soil drives our farms. And so today in this video, we'll be talking about soil health and what we can do to improve soil health with our 7 principles of soil health. Now this I have aggregated from multiple different sources, added my own things to it, and I'll be speaking on different principles of this, using examples and what you can do on your farm or your veggie garden to improve your soil. If you don't know who I am, I'm Teal Simmons. I run this channel, Agriculture Explained. I also run Agresol, which is a consulting business. We help New South Wales farmers, as well as other farmers across Australia, in improving their soil through our regenerative programs. So if that sounds like you, go to our website. There should be a description here. We also have a free course that you can do on our website. It's our Soil Organic Carbon Masterclass, completely free. Go check it out. Otherwise, let's learn about soil health. So we have basically our 7 principles here: context, minimal disturbance, cover, diversity, living roots, livestock, and mindset. Now I've ranked these in a very specific order. They range from easy to do and implement to very hard to implement. And really, when we think about where our farm is on this, most of the times we're going to start here and then work down, and the more regenerative or higher your soil health index is. And really our farms are going to play somewhere on this line. So if we've been doing a really good job, we're going to be quite down here where we're doing these higher level principles. If we're only just really starting, we're doing quite conventional things, we might still be understanding our context of our farm. So when we go through these, remember, kind of easy to implement, hard to implement. And then really you've got to progress down each one before you can really get to the next one, except mindset, but we'll get to that. So context. What is the context of our soil? It actually falls under a bit of a broader idea. So it's the context of our soil, the context of how we want to manage. So for example, we can do a whole range of different things that's super hard to do, but if we don't really want to manage like that, if we don't want to, put the extra time in, and that's completely fine if you want to have less of a workload, that's a part of our context. So if we have a context where we don't want to work as hard, we've got to make strategies to suit that. If we don't want to work 80 hours a week, we've got to make strategies that we can implement with 20 hours a week. So some of the things of our context, and specifically for our soil, is we want to know the texture of our soil. So we have clay, silt, and sand, the proportions of those in our soil. We want to know, our cation exchange capacity. We want to know our nutritional status of our soil, what our microbes are doing. This is really just about understanding our situation and our soil, because that is going to influence what cover crops we're going to put in, what inoculants, what fertilizers we're going to put in, or to improve our soil. It's also important to understand the context of our enterprise. So are we grazing livestock? And what livestock? Are we doing cattle? Are we doing sheep? We're doing both. We're doing pigs. Are we in a horticulture situation, a perennial system of apple trees or citrus? Are we doing lots of tractor passes? All these kind of things are going to influence everything else we're going to do. So we start off with understanding our soil. How does it function? Why does it function? What is its capacities and limitations? This is actually the first step we go through when we consult with clients. We want to understand our soils. We don't want to guess at the other things. We want to really test what our soil is. And we do that with soil tests and visual soil assessments, all that good stuff. Cool. So once we understand our context, we can then go through some of our other principles, because the context informs the recommendations or the practices that we're going to implement at different principles. So our second principle is minimal disturbance. So the minimal disturbance is almost things that we implement onto our farm that are reducing our soil health. So we can't do these other things if we're really subtracting away from our soil health. So disturbance could be tillage. I got a whole video on the negative sides of tillage. Now there is positive sides of tillage, don't get me wrong, but in terms of soil health, it can be quite damaging to our soil, to the microbes, and to the soil structure and all of that. So tillage is a main one that we can start to reduce, and of course, depending on our context, it can be quite difficult to implement a no-till strategy. But if you can do that, you'll definitely see an improvement in soil health. Another type of disturbance to our soil is the application of salt-based fertilizers. So this can be potassium chloride, anything with the chloride in it. This increases the salinity of our soil, which affects the osmotic pressures within our soil, which then impacts the drought resilience of our plants. Also impacts our microbes. We've got a whole video on salinity if you want to watch that. It also has an impact on the interaction with other nutrients, specifically when we have a lot of chloride. Another disturbance we can have is application of herbicides and fungicides, most of the sides which are quite damaging to our microbes. So when we think about, we have our soil, if we're running through with a plough, we're chopping all this soil up, we're destroying structure. Structure is a good sign of soil health. You want your soil to be nice, well structured so that you can get a lot of airflow within the soil, a lot of infiltration. But if we're chopping all this up, we're destroying soil structure, and so we're going to be reducing soil health. So once we learn how to manage with no-till, and it's quite easy, in Australia at least, I think it's like 90 or 95% of farms practice no-till. So I'd say in terms of where most farms sit, definitely at the minimizing disturbance. It's probably where we sit. We can talk about the other ones soon. But when we reduce our tillage, go no-till, and we can cut back on salt-based fertilizers and reduce our herbicide usage, then we're really going to be protecting our soil, or we're going to be reducing the disturbances we're inflicting on our soil, which will start to allow us to build on our soil health. Now, don't get me wrong, those things are great. Applying fertilizer is great when you need it. Tillage is great when you need it. Herbicides and pesticides and all that is great when you need it. We just got to understand if we're applying those in an unnecessary way, it is going to be reducing our soil health. But as long as you know what's going on when you're doing stuff, then that's the most important thing. The third principle is cover. So when we think about our soil as a living organism, and we think about ourselves getting sunburnt, let me find the red marker, when we leave our soil uncovered, it's going to be impacted from sunlight, UV light. We get sunburnt. The soil is also kind of getting sunburnt. We're getting these really harsh UV rays hitting our soil. Firstly, that's going to bake the top of our soil. It's going to destroy a lot of our microbes in the top, our topsoil, the most fertile part of our soil. It's going to be oxidizing our soil, so making nutrients less available to our plants. It's also going to dry out our soil profile. So we're going to be increasing our evaporation rate, and we're losing soil moisture. So we don't want to do that. So instead what we can do is practice things like stubble retention. So this is where we have, say in our wheat, we harvest it, instead of burning off our stubble or baling it up for straw, we leave that stubble there. Actually, we might use green. Actually, no, we use black. So we leave the straw standing upright or even laying down. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a physical barrier between the elements. So rain, so erosion, that's a really big one in especially more high rainfall areas, and UV light. So this will be protecting our soil from evaporation. So we're going to be maintaining more water moisture, and we'll also be protecting our soil from erosion. So we won't be having mass rain splash action, which will transport our soil particles elsewhere and losing fertility. We'll be protecting our soil. So this is like armor that we're going to be putting on our soil surface. So things like stubble retention, especially in a cropping sense, that's really important. You can use cover crops, and that also feeds into another principle, but really anything that creates a surface that separates our soil from damaging impacts of UV light and water, or water impact. What litter also does, which is really good, is it increases our infiltration rates. And so the water, so we have water coming down. So when it hits some litter, it'll take a lot of that energy out. So it'll take the energy out from that water, and then it'll trickle down into our soil profile, nice and slow. And that's what we want. What we don't want is when we have water coming in, hitting our soil, which dislodges our soil particles, causing them to basically move away in the flow, in the runoff of the rain. That's going to transport nutrients away from our paddocks, which we don't want. We want to keep everything on our paddocks. So in a cropping sense, again, we're going to be practicing stubble retention. There's some ways that you can even go better than this in a cropping sense. You can implement I think it's called a stripper harvester, and it basically comes across the top and picks rather than cutting it a lot further down. That's going to leave a lot more stubble. In a livestock sense, we can make sure our pastures have enough growth still left on them so that they will be protecting our soils. If we're grazing right down to the ground, we're not going to have as much cover. And again, in a horticulture sense, especially in our perennial systems, making sure we have plants on interrows will protect our soil. Otherwise, mulching in the in-rows is good. And then in our small crops, which is quite difficult because there's a very high amount of turnaround, having cover crops in there when you don't have a crop in there will help protect the soil, as well as leaving residue behind, so plant matter. So once we understand our context, we can start to inform that we want to minimize the things that we're doing against our soil or harming our soil. We're going to start covering our soil. So we're not going to be breaking up our soil. We're going to create a physical barrier to protect our soil from splash action, rain splash action, and UV light. Next, we have diversity. So if you think about nature, it's very diverse. Now, diversity, the big thing about diversity is that it brings functionality to our landscapes and to our soil. The reason why we want diversity is for that functionality. So we want to have a range of different roots in our soil that's going to be stimulating different microbes. It's going to be taking different nutrient profiles out. There's going to be a disease benefit when we have different plants. There's a whole range of different benefits that we get from diversity, but it all stems from increased functionality on our land. Now, there's a few different ways we can do this. We can have diversity in terms of across the years. So this is things like crop rotation, which a lot of Australian farmers implement. It can be cover crops as well, so increasing the amount of species that we have across, say, 5 years. If we go from wheat, chickpeas, sorghum, maybe a pasture phase, it might take 5 years before we get back to the same plant. So that is a benefit to diversity. The other thing we can do is have plants growing with our cash crop to then increase diversity. So an example that I saw once was clover and wheat. So basically what the farmer did was he grew clover for two years, and then he grazed that quite heavily, planted his wheat, and then once the wheat kind of established, the clover then came up. And so you had a legume as well as a cereal. So that's more benefit or more diverse than what just having a cereal would supply. Now, in terms of that legume, that would be supplying additional nitrogen to the crop. It would be stimulating different microbes. It would also be introducing more insects to then fight off different pests attacking the wheat. In terms of our cover crops, for example, diversity in a cover crop is really good. It conserves water. It increases the biomass that the overall cover crop produces. It's very synergistic. When we have diversity, or most of the time when we have diversity, it creates synergistic effects. It's not that we're getting a 1 + 1 = 2 situation. We're getting a 1 + 1 = 11. So the overall benefit is increased greater than the sum of its parts because of this interaction effect. So again, diversity in our rotations, which reduces disease, and it's a massive benefit. Diversity in our cover crops, and then also if you're going to get really into this, diversity in the cash crop growing season. So that's 4. That's going to increase functionality. Number 5, living roots. Now this is very important for stimulating our microbes. What we want to do, and especially for mycorrhizal fungi, is have living roots growing in our soil all the time. We have a video on the impact of living roots through root exudates if you want to go check that out and why it's so important. But effectively, living roots is the best way to supply our microbes food. And so when we supply, say, when we're stimulating our microbes in our soil, that's going to increase mineralization rates. It's going to increase our mycorrhizal fungi networks, which will then increase the amount of zinc and phosphorus and water supplied to our plants. we're going to have a more functional biological component within our soil, which then generates all these other chemical and physical benefits. So we want to have living roots all year round, which is quite difficult, especially for our cropping and small crop horticulture farmers. The best way to do this is to start off with a cover crop in your non-growing season if rainfall allows you to, or your water moisture allows you to. Otherwise, a really interesting practice that you can look into, or at least try, is pasture cropping. This is when you have a warm season perennial grass. Most of the time it's native, which is less so productive. You're going to allow that to grow over summer, graze that before winter, so you can plant your effectively wheat, for example, into that. And so this will allow for you to have almost like a perennial cover crop, so for example, growing all year round, or having live roots in the ground all year round, and have your cash crop at the same time. You'll also add diversity into your mix by having livestock, and you're going to have perennial grasses in there as well. The other thing about diversity is that, jumping back to it, is that it can increase the stability of your business. So if we have livestock, if we have wheat, if we have chickpeas, if we have canola, what's that? That's 4 different enterprises that our business is diversified across. So that if wheat, for example, has a crash in the price, then we can rely on 3 other prices to stabilise that out. Now, it is more complicated to manage, but you get more benefits. So you've got to weigh that up. Living roots, we're going to increase the amount of sugar supplied to our microbes, increase microbial functioning. We're going to suppress disease in our soil. We're going to increase aggregation. This is probably where we all want to try and get up to, living roots, because this massively increases soil health and the functioning of our soil. Next, we have livestock. Now, this is probably one of the hardest things to implement, especially for croppers, and even especially for small crop producers. It's quite difficult to get livestock, and it is probably more the optional thing. But if you can do that, I definitely recommend at least trialing that, because that can significantly improve our soil health. I saw one study, I can't quite remember the name, Dale Stickler introduced me to it, and they compared the mycorrhizal fungi, the amount of mycorrhizal fungi in a cover crop that was terminated with livestock versus terminated with, it was a roller crimper. So it was organic, it was just a big roller that goes across and crimps your cover crop. And I think it was the order of 10 times the amount of mycorrhizal fungi in the livestock termination. There's a very interesting effect of when livestock graze plants and you get all these plant signaling and responses, somehow stimulates the soil. When you also think back to nature, you have all these grazers grazing plants. These systems are meant to have livestock in them. But again, if you don't have the fencing, you don't have the farm infrastructure, if you simply don't want to manage livestock, it can be quite hard to implement. Just focusing on these will get you 80% of the way there. So if you can just get even your way up to principle 5, that's pretty good. Coming back to diversity from livestock, you have that additional enterprise. So then you can trade livestock, which can improve, again, the stability of your income. The hardest, but also not quite dependent on following these, is your mindset. Mindset's probably the hardest principle to change. A lot of us, and myself included, can get stuck thinking a particular way. So being able to have a growth mindset or regenerative mindset, whatever label you want to put on it, to be able to test different ideas and go to test different ideas and not be stuck in the way that you have thought beforehand. It's quite hard to see your blind spots. So, getting in touch with a community of like-minded farmers or consultants or advisors is a great way to check your own mindset and prevent falling into those traps. Cool. So if you can follow at least step 1 to 5, you'll see a massive improvement within your soil, increased infiltration rates, increased microbial activity, which supplies so much benefits to our soil. We're going to increase even the root depth of our soil, so our roots are going to explore further into our soil profile, which means effectively we're getting more available nutrients and water because we can explore further into our soil, which will all come out in our business. All of this should come out as more profitable farming. We're going to be able to reduce our inputs ideally, and we should be able to be more stable through climate variation. Awesome. Well, I hope you liked that video and you got a lot from it. If you are a farmer trying to implement some of these, let me know in the comments where you line up and what you're trying to do on your farm. Again, all farms are different, so it's very hard to prescribe, different practices at different steps. But if you are finding that some things are working for you or aren't working for you, I'd love to know in the comments. So chuck those down there. Otherwise, again, we have that free course on our website, so go check that out if you want to learn more about soil organic carbon. And finally, make sure to subscribe. Trying to get this channel to grow. And if you subscribe, you can get more of this free content for free on YouTube. It's my mission to help farmers across the world learn more about soil health. So if I can help you do that, that would be great. Awesome. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers.